Hola, I'm Sterling, and welcome to Comic Hunter. Cardboard Hunter. This is gonna get confusing. Okay, so is a game worth learning Portuguese? That's only a slightly steeper learning curve than Twilight Imperium, so maybe? Today, we're going to venture into a Brazil-only print. This was only printed in Portuguese, never in English, and it's a slightly controversial game. I don't mean in the sense that the game or publisher or designer did anything wrong. I mean that when you bring it up amongst industry people, they tend to have varying and passionate opinions on the subject of comic hunters. So, join me as we dive into this one and see what's going on. Will it ever see a US print run? And an interview with the designer, Robert Coelho. I hope I did not butcher your name. Now, as of this recording, Comic Hunters is officially out of print, even in Brazil. Well, that's the only place it ever was in print, but there were other ways to get it elsewhere in the world, but you were gonna have to be like me and pay an arm and a leg for this thing, and I did. Though it's raised since I bought it, I'm starting to feel better about what I spent on it, which was almost $200. It's above that now. We'll get to that later. According to the designer Robert, Comic Hunters had a 1-year Brazil exclusive licensing agreement for this game. Since then, the license has run its course and has not yet been renewed. But if you wait around for the interview later in the video, Robert's going to give us some insight as to whether or not you can expect to see this finally showing up on your shelves in the US and elsewhere. Now, among industry heads, I've heard everything from this game was originally published with no license agreement, completely illegally, all the way to they've already secured an international license agreement, and just wait, it's coming to the States any day now. According to our interview with Robert, both of those are false. Now, that's not to say it's not going to come to the States, but as Robert will explain, there's a little work to be done. So, we're going to dispel some of the myths surrounding Comic Hunters and catch you up to speed on what's really going on with this game, where it really stands. I also want you to note that I keep saying industry and not community when I'm talking about Comic Hunters. That is intentional. And the reason I'm choosing to say that is because Comic Hunters largely is unknown in the community right now. But if you're in the industry, you probably have heard about it because it has caused quite a stir, largely thanks to the Dice Tower, specifically Mike Deluxe, who has ranted and raved and given Comic Hunters some much deserved praise and recognition. And we thank Mike for that, because if you're like me, you may not have ever heard of this game without Mike. The only reason I'm doing a video on it right now is thanks to Mike. So if this video does well, I guess I owe him a big thanks next time I see him at a convention. So where do we start? How about an elevator pitch on why you should like, comment, and subscribe? We are currently running a giveaway for the 20th anniversary Deluxe Kickstarter edition of Bus by Splotter and Capstone games. Still in shrink, incredibly rare, incredibly pricey, and I'm going to give this to one of our subscribers, and I'm very excited about that. So definitely make sure to subscribe and comment on a few videos, get you a couple entries, and I wish you all luck in your shot at Bus. We talk about table presence with board games a lot, and usually what we mean is these big, elaborate, sprawling game boards and just crazy detailed miniatures and components. But Comic Hunters does it different, and Comic Hunters arguably does it better than all of the others. When you say table presence, I don't think anything is competing with Comic Hunters. They beat out all the others with nothing but a couple decks of cards. Spreading out the cards of Comic Hunters across the table is jaw-dropping, to say the least. The decks are made up of authentic comics from the 60s all the way to today. Well, technically to 2020, which is when this game was published, as I don't believe Robert had quite mastered time travel at that point. Oh my god, look at that Spider-Man. What a beautiful card. I don't know if the camera can get that. Oh my god, run that B-roll and ignore Sterling from Post, who's gonna call me a nerd over this one. These cards pay homage to some of the most sought after and loved pieces of artistic expression to exist in modern history. You may not have grown up collecting comics, but we've all seen a few comic covers that have stopped us in our tracks and commanded our appreciation. Don't be surprised if the first game you play of Comic Hunters pushes over that hour-and-a-half mark just because every player is drooling over every new card they draw. I recommend double sleeving these cards for the same reason, as board game nerd drool is quite toxic, containing practically radioactive levels of Doritos, pizza grease, and Wild Bill's old-fashioned soda. By the way, if you got that last reference, we're legally best friends now. Now, the game itself is in Portuguese, as you can see on the board, but it's my understanding that if you speak Spanish, you should be able to make do here. However, if you do not speak or understand Spanish or Portuguese, it's not that big of a deal because the game is almost exclusively symbology. For example, if you look at the cards themselves, they're actually English and symbology. No Portuguese at all on the cards. You learn the game once and you know what these different things are. You know, maybe you need to refer to a rule book here and there the first couple times you play it. But if you go on Board Game Geek, you can actually download an English copy, which I've printed out and laminated. And I think I've referred to it one time when I was setting up the game, just because I forgot how many cards go into one of the decks. Other than that, I can practically teach this game with my eyes closed. Now, the decks are split into 3 eras, which are the 2000s to the 2020s, which are your modern comics. Then classic comics from the 80s to the 90s. And finally, vintage comics from the 60s and 70s. Some of these genuine Marvel comic illustrations are incredibly rare comics that you'd almost certainly never see or actually have a chance to hold in your hands in real life. But let's talk about components. So I want to preface here. I'm going to go into components, and this is going to get into my first, not rant and rave in favor of the game, but my preface here is I'm not actually that hip to what is and isn't expected out of a board game in Brazil. This is a game that was never made for international distribution. So it's kind of unfair to me to get too critical of the components because for all we know, this is totally in line with expectations in their local community. And I also don't know what the financial decisions were that went into this game. With a game that was probably pretty expensive to license at all, maybe they had to cut a few corners. But I thought it would be dishonest of me to not give my genuine feelings of my experience opening and inspecting these components. So firstly, this game to me looks like a very premium experience. I mean, even taking the fact that I paid a pretty penny for it, if I got this new off of a shelf, just with its presentation from the box alone, which I do want to say the box is phenomenal quality. This is very tough and thick cardboard. The printing on it is better than almost any game I have in my collection. I mean, I really can't speak high enough about the box. So, you know, if I picked that up, I would expect when I opened it to get that premium experience from the components inside, which I don't think I did. You know, first player tip, it would have been cool to do something. It's supposed to be Stan Lee's glasses, so it would have been cool to see maybe a miniature of that as the first player marker. And also these little cardboard superhero and objective tokens. I just would have loved to seen them in acrylic. So, you know, it is what it is. The board, I don't know how much you can see this, but it does not lay flat. I've had to work with it because, I mean, it really, when it came, it like sticks up like that, which, you know, not uncommon in the board game world for a board to not lay perfectly flat. But I will say, normally when I work with a board to kind of flex it and get it to lay flat, it should then lay flat. This one is kind of like a surfboard, you know? It sticks up, it bows on the sides. That's not something I can fix that easily without taking a big risk of damaging this board. That's a little disappointing. So components, I'm gonna have to say they took an L on the components. But the illustrations, you know, they still carry. They carry. This game is a mixture of set collection, of auctioning, and hand management, which I think gives it just enough meat on the bone to really enjoy this game. Any less than that, and honestly, it would be a pretty easy pass to me. I think expansions could do a lot for the replayability, as it does get a bit repetitive after, you know, a handful of plays. But I'll say this is a family weight game. This is a entry level, you know, kind of game. I wouldn't quite call it a filler. It's a little long for a filler. So if you bought this game like me with some ideas in mind and then played it, it may have fallen a bit short. It did with me. Now, before you think I'm condemning the game, spoilers, I love this game. But when I first bought this and when I watched a few videos, in my head, I had envisioned something along the lines of Reiner Knizia's Modern Art. Like, Modern Art is a auctioning game with set collection. This is a set collection with auctioning. So why I say that is because when I did initially play it, it felt a little too light for my taste. I continued to play it, I stepped back and processed my thoughts on it, and I stopped thinking of it as a $200 to $300 game that I had bought on the secondhand market that I expected so much out of, to what was this game meant to be? When Robert designed it, what were his intentions? How did he want it enjoyed and appreciated at the price point he had in mind? And when I did that and I stepped back to try to approach the game as actually intended, I really fell in love with this game. Which brings me to my highest compliment for Comic Hunters, which is the theme to mechanic, seamless and authentic integration. It just beautifully ties this whole collecting comics into actual game mechanics. Like, you feel like by collecting the comics and putting them in certain sets that it actually is scoring appropriately. It doesn't feel like the different arts and the different characters are just there to heighten as illustrations. You really do want to put the Captain Americas together. You really do want to find the one that has Doctor Strange and Spider-Man on the same card, because it'll give you some wiggle room to go either way if you need to later in the game. Oh, it's so good. But let's talk about the naysayers for a second. Because when this game first came out and was making waves, one of the common things you would hear is, oh, well, they don't actually have copyright laws in Brazil. You can just do whatever you want. It's the wild, wild west. They just printed this game and took advantage of the IP. Excuse me? Please enlighten me on your clearly extensive research on Brazilian copyright and licensing law. No. Brazil's regulations and laws surrounding such things are far more similar to our own, of which you also have not done research on. I'm problematic. In fact, it took quite a bit of effort and time for Robert and the publisher to finally get the license agreement with Disney and Marvel. And if you know anything about Disney, they don't exactly hand these licensing agreements out. I've also heard these rumors and speculations that, oh, the Dice Tower's already got this all worked out. They're getting ready to publish and release it themselves, and they're just going to shed that IP off of it and just basically re-illustrate the whole game. That's not accurate, no. The Dice Tower has been extremely kind with the publisher and designer to introduce them to some other publishers and distributors that are actively trying to help them secure that international licensing agreement, but the Dice Tower themselves are not actively working on publishing this game. Now, the other part of that with the potential of shedding the IP and re-releasing the game with a new theme, certainly possible. My understanding is that is not something they're actively trying to do, but I'm sure that's a plan B for them. But since this is all speculation and rumors, how about we just jump into the interview and let Robert talk about this himself?
Every IP has a rich environment to work and to bring to life. And when you get the fan of that IP emotionally involved with the gameplay,
For sure.
I guess that's the aim of the creative process. And that was something I always have had in mind when I was creating Comic Hunters, because I am a comic collector myself. And
Very cool.
so when I was playtesting the game and looking for how that worked, that all the drafts and all the set collections, I knew that there was a way to please the comic collector, and they play the game and they feel like, oh, I time traveled to when I was a young boy buying comics and all that. And at that moment, I know that it was a good job.
Yeah, that's awesome. That kind of brings up another question I had, which was, at what point did Marvel Comics enter the game? Like, was that something you started off on that was up front, or did you kind of start building on the idea and come up with that? Chicken or the egg question, I guess.
That's it. The egg question. I had the idea of a game about collecting comics.
Okay.
I found a website that it's like a museum, a comic museum, digital museum.
Okay.
They have scans of really old comics that are in public domain.
Okay.
And I start looking to the pages and the front pages, the covers, and I said, this is public domain. I can make a game about it, about collecting these comics, and that would be awesome. So I start saving all the covers. Let me put this on the drawer, and I'll come back to this later. So 2 years later, I had a friend that he was at my house. We were playing board games and all that. He has a publisher, Bucaneiros, which is the publisher of Comic Hunters. And we were playing another prototype of mine that is Shakespeare, Kings of a Bard. And he played and he liked it a lot. And he thought, he told me, this game is fantastic. It would be really awesome if we had the Marvel characters on it. So, but that must be very expensive. And there was another friend on the table. And while we were talking about that, he Googled the Marvel Brazilian office.
Okay.
So I found the office here. I have the email of the person you have to talk. I'll send an email and I'll book a meeting. So 2 weeks later, he calls me and said, okay, you have to prepare a presentation because we have a meeting on Disney next month.
Oh, wow.
And then when I created the presentation, I thought, well, I will not just put one game on the presentation. I'll put more games. So we can show that we have a lot of ideas. I got back that idea that was on the drawer from the collecting comics. We had the meeting and it was fantastic. They loved the ideas and start working on the contract. It's very bureaucratic to have a Marvel license. So because Disney wants everything correctly done. So it took kind of a year to get the signed contract. And after that, we start working on the games. They chose the Comic Hunter game. Kind of a year after they signed the contract, the game was released.
Wow.
And and it was huge because nobody was expecting a publisher in Brazil to license Marvel and create games. One day, a guy come to talk to me in Facebook, a guy I didn't know before. Hi, Robert. My name is Thiago, and I sent a Comic Hunters to Mike Delicio from Dice Tower because and all of them they loved the game, and Mike did a video review, and that got more attention internationally. We started on the journey to how are we going to get this published outside Brazil, because the license contract for Bucaneiros was only for Brazil. It didn't have the rights to public or worldwide. And the contract has finished. It was a 1-year contract.
Oh, so are you limited? You can't even print it in Brazil now?
Yeah, right now, Bucaneiros cannot. And they didn't renew the contract. I start talking to them about how we could get this on the States or on Europe. Try to find a publisher that already has the license or something like that. And 2 years ago, I guess, Bucaneiros made a partnership with another publisher. It's Meeple BR. It's the same
Okay.
publisher of World Wonders and Zeo Imperial and Hyper Dungeons and other games. So now Meeple BR, they are representing Bucaneros internationally.
Okay.
And they start talking to publishers in America. So right now, I cannot tell you when and I cannot tell you who, but Comic Hunters will be in the United States soon.
Excellent. Do you think it's going to look the way it looks now, or will there be some little bit of twisting?
Yeah, it's gonna look like the way it looks now. I'm trying to get some improvements. I'm not sure if it will happen, but I'm trying to do that. I was working on expansions and all that.
And I'm sure it's a little bittersweet kind of seeing the secondhand market of the game. Like, I know it's got to be awesome seeing that people love the game enough that they're willing to spend that kind of money, but I'm sure you'd much rather people just had the game more accessible instead of spending hundreds of dollars.
And I hope now in 2024 this happens.
Yeah.
But people were paying crazy.
Yeah.
Right now it's out of print in Brazil. You don't find it in any store. Just find a second hand here also. Like you said, I prefer that the game is more accessible and more people can play it.
For sure.
And thankfully, this is happening in the near future.
Yeah. Firstly, I adore and respect Robert and this game, but I would be doing you a disservice if I did not go through my critiques of Comic Hunters as part of this video. Now, this game offered me a unique experience that I don't soon expect to find with any other game. So as I said before, my initial thoughts going into the game did not lend well to the first gameplay experience I had. However, when I accepted this game as the family weight game it's meant to be, I have really been able to appreciate it. But here are my problems with Comic Hunters. And I'm going to be honest, most of my problems with this game are not the fault of Robert or the publisher. They are not things that they could have done differently. Most of my problems with Comic Hunters are as a Grail collector. I have to approach this game as a Grail for my collection. What are some other $300 games, and how does this stack up against that? Not necessarily gameplay to gameplay, but do I prefer to have something else in my collection versus Comic Hunters? I play my Grails. My copy of Bus has dings and scratches. I play it. Container, I play it. Like, these games I have purchased to play, not to collect. So this game, being a family weight game, do I need a $300 family weight game? No, I've got a ton of family weight games. If I did not have Comic Hunters in my collection, my game night is not going to be lacking. I could only carry it around to conventions and show it off like it's a brand new Charizard I just pulled so many times before people think I'm weird. No, if I'm going to have another game on my shelves in this price range, it's got to bring a little bit heavier experience to me, because that's what I enjoy as a player. That's not to say that this may not be for you even at that high secondhand market price range, but it would be for you if you were a collector, a completionist, or someone who does actually enjoy these lighter games and plays a lot with family members, or you're just legitimately, you love collecting comic books, in which this is going to be a Grail unlike any other. If this game, worst case scenario, which I'll say I do think this would be worst case scenario, saw a international reprint and had to shed the IP, and they just reworked the illustrations or found maybe a smaller IP that was okay with giving them their comic art, I think I would recommend that game over this version. This one would still be beautiful and unlike anything else to experience, but you're gonna get the same gameplay for a much lower price point if they do that. And I would probably recommend that game. I think the retheme would be in good hands with Robert if they chose to go that direction. But if they do somehow pull it off, getting this IP and bring it international, this is going to be huge. It's gonna blow up everyone's top 10 that year. But this game has to get to MSRP before anyone should be recommending Comic Hunters. I want to remind everyone again about our giveaway for Bus. another grail. You just have to subscribe and comment on some of our videos. You will get an entry into the contest for every video you have commented on. And this next part, I'm not just saying for engagement purposes. I genuinely am asking you to do this. In the comment section, please tell me how you think I did on this one, because I'm curious. I was very torn about this. I was very excited to do this one. I got to interview Robert. You get to know someone through this process, and the last thing you want to do is critique their game. You want to just praise it, but you got to be honest too. It wouldn't be fair to my viewers if I wasn't honest. So tell me how you think I did. Was I a little too harsh? Was I just in that sweet zone? Or maybe I was too nice? I don't know. I did try to be delicate and respectful. But until next time, keep hunting that cardboard.